Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and today I have a special guest, BillyVonElds. So, for those of you who don't know who Billy is, or Bill, do you care if I call you Billy or Bill?
Either one works. Bill, we'll go with Bill.
All right. So, Bill has made a lot of bills on DraftKings, and he won a Millionaire Maker contest in the NFL. So he kind of knows what he's doing. He's pretty good at the whole DFS thing. Bill, did I miss anything? What would you like the people to know about you before we start taking a look at the stats?
Yeah, I know a little bit about DFS. I have a lot to learn about League of Legends. So I think that hopefully our plan here is to put our heads together and see if there's anything here I can add and what you can teach me.
Cool. That is a good way to approach it. He definitely knows more about DFS than me, and I think I know more than him about League of Legends, but we'll find out shortly. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe he'll give me $1 million. I don't know. So
we'll see.
So damn it, that sounds like a no. Let's take a look first. So basically, he sent me a couple pictures of the stats that he has through Twitter. So here's the first picture we have. I am looking extremely pale today. That's from screen glare because of Excel. Thank you, Microsoft, for doing me no justice. But here's the first slide. So I have the team data, 15 game moving average, and the summary one. So like the first picture you sent me.
Sure. And so this is basically just my, it's really sort of a quick and dirty process. But my power rankings on a league by league basis, LCK, LCS, LEC, and LPL, and the I guess second to right, the two right columns are the same. The rank percentage is just putting the column to the left of that on a 0 to 100 scale.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically what the driver of this is, team gold differential on a per minute basis. So trying to take out differences in rate of play and sort of teams that play fast versus slow. And then adjusting the per minute goal differential for each team by the average differential for their opponent in that game. So, if, for example, what's an average team here on my scale, say if IG over their last 15 games is overall, you add up all the goals from those games, if they're a 0, there'd be no adjustment for that. But if their average game they are behind by 25 goals, then I would expect a team to beat them by an average team to beat them by 25. So that's really the simple adjustment that comes in. And so this is looking at on that adjusted basis how much our team's beating their opponents by in a goal basis. The reason I used gold, which is I think one of the other shots I sent you, maybe we can get that later. It was part driven by, I think it's a decent metric and part just by what I had sort of available.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of this chart just sort of moving to the left is, going back the last 10 games, how that number in the current column has changed over time.
Okay, so I have the other one is the correlation of season stats to individual game stats. Is that the one that you're talking about?
Yeah, and so the when I first started playing League, DFS generally I found when I'm building out sort of these quantitative metrics or approaches, I like having game by game data. I find that weekly or sort of seasonal data this doesn't really allow me to sort of do some of the things that I want to do. And when I started playing, just get my battery here. When I first started playing League, I was listening to a lot of sort of podcasts and different content. The guys like you and I'm George and a couple of guys that are been doing this for a long time and know a lot. And one of the things that John said on a podcast is that he likes to look at metrics on sort of a wins only and losses only basis. So I started sort of just basically, I built out my own database of game data, scraping data from Gamepedia. And so really, the metrics that they have there are limited, but are basically the ones that are looked at their kills, deaths, assists, as well as gold and CS. And so what I did, spring split, I just sort of came in and tried to figure out things on the fly. But when we had the break between spring and summer, sat down and tried to look from a DFS perspective at the things that we're always looking for, right, or predictive of fantasy points and other metrics, and the sort of contributing pieces of what add up to fantasy points. And then among those stats that are predictive, which ones become normalized quickest. So what can we look at a small sample of and use that data to figure out or to get our best guess of what's going to happen in the future. This is basically just looking at the correlation of each on a player-by-player basis, their season-long, average kills per game, average assists per game, versus what they did game by game week. And sort of, which stats are the stickiest, which stats are the most predictive in the game. And as you can see here, I think it makes sense logically. Gold correlates highly, in its first causation, I think, or at least I guess, right? You don't have, right? I guess through gold, right? You get gold, for killing people or for getting assists.
Yeah.
Down its power. Then that gives you items, which can, like just snowball, just sort of the in simple. So even I know that about League, right? And so when I with gold sort of being sort of most sticky of the stats that I had in my database, I also did sort of regressions on different things, and that gold kept popping up as sort of the the R squares on that, which were really high. So that's why, or sort of why I sort of took that as like my one statistic I'm going to look at and just sort of make a more simple, sort of chart here.
Sure. So your voice is kind of like getting a little low again. So I think basically, just to sum up, the main point that you had was that gold was one of the stats that you were attracted to first because that was one of the most easily available stats to find on a place like Gamepedia, and it makes sense compared to like when a team wins, they're going to have more gold. My issue, I guess, with gold is that it doesn't give you an accurate depiction of what a good team would do against a good team, because like literally any team could beat any other team in the world by like 10 to 20, or probably like 10,000 gold. That's really the highest you see it get for the most part. So my only concern would be like if I'm a team like Gen G from last split, I'm going to have a ton of big wins against bad teams in Korea, and my gold differential is going to look very good, but it may not give the full picture against a team like T1 or Dragon X, because they are less likely to give up those gigantic advantages in the first place. So one of the things that you identified was if, I guess the way to talk about it is, if you were correct and gold was something that was easy to predict in the early game and mid game, regardless of the enemy, like if it was just if the economy of the game was not dependent on the other team as well, where like you had complete control over your own economy, then I could see it being even stickier. But since you are playing against another team and they're at varying skill levels, T1 and Dragon X are the two teams that I think, if you looked at the information from last split, they posed big problems for Gen G because they were not giving up those gigantic leads in the early game, and like you said, once you start snowballing, it's tough to stop the snowball. So that's one thing that I would take a look at for Gen G probably, if you wanted to backtest that again, and that helps explain the Cloud9 situation that we have right now in North America. So would you say that you have a favorite league right now, one that's either the most entertaining to watch or the one that you're the most interested in?
Yeah, I as much as it has messed up my sleep patterns, I really like the LPL. A lot of kills, a lot of blood, a lot of action. I think it was when I did back in March when the boom started, was I think LCS and LAC were on their break, or they did, I think, or maybe like a week or two after it. With the LPL on every night the weekend. I think the league I've seen the most. That probably adds to it too. But definitely.
Yeah. So yeah, traditionally I was never a gigantic fan of the LPL. Just like I was always like a Korea truther. I would always say like Korea is the better league. When they get to international tournaments, I would expect the Korean teams to always win. They had the best player in the world. Like all those kinds of just generic things that fans really talk about when they're not necessarily watching every single game. But since the whole coronavirus thing, I've been watching every single game, looking at it for DFS reasons, but also because I'm interested in the game itself. Like I do coach, and like I just honestly love the game. So I think as I've watched more LPL, I've become more appreciative of what they do well, and I think that Korea's probably going to get some negative influence from them because they're copying the playstyle of China as opposed to letting it like foster naturally in their own ecosystem, because Korea traditionally has been very macro focused because they want to reduce variance and play around predictable game states. China's basically saying, well, if that's the first level of thinking, second level of thinking would be try to cut that at its foundation, break it at its foundation, and play hyper aggressive early game and try to get them off script. And that's been very successful. So there are other video games where you see something similar, like in Hearthstone. It's a card game, and there are different kinds of decks. Like some are good at the early game, some are good at the mid game, and some scale into infinity. So it's the same thing in League of Legends. I feel like China's probably an early to mid game kind of region right now, and all the snowballing mechanisms that are in place right now are tough to stop. So they're really incentivized to play the way that they play. You see a team like T1, they can adapt to play that style and will take games off of Chinese teams and be competitive. But when you have talent that's equal on both sides, it's going to be really tough to consistently outscale those kinds of teams. So let's take a look at the LPL. So are there any big differences between what you've witnessed watching the games as opposed to what your data has said? Like, are there any surprise teams or outlier teams that you think are interesting?
I would say, so the other way, I guess we'd be going the other way. Okay, although they've fallen a little bit in the last, maybe 5 to 6 games, is one of the teams I've enjoyed watching the most is Suning. I really like Wanfeng and sort of the way they play, and thought they were sort of, watching from the little I know. So I was sort of pleased to see them sort of in like a top 5 to 6, maybe 7 type range, and thought, I think they've gotten some buzz about being a playoff team. I support that. So that was one that definitely stood out. And then I guess another one that surprised me, although I think they've been rightly put in their place over the past, sort of same time frame as DMO. I guess maybe some context I can add to the rankings that you and I have discussed on Twitter is that these are sort of league by league, so they're 50 in the LCS is not necessarily equivalent to a 50 in the LCK or the LEC, and teams or players move from league to league. There's no way possible here. I haven't developed a method for doing that. So, for example, if you take team dynamic rankings, that data is driven by mostly by their games in the calendar league and the promotion series. So their level of competition is lower, but the model doesn't know that. So with DMO, they brought up a couple of players from the LDL early on. I haven't with my model and upsetting whoever they played second because they were giving those LDL players a lot of credit for performing above average in the LDL. And so that one, I was like, oh, did I find a diamond in the rough here? And quickly realized I had not. I rightly got pronounced in there for a couple games.
Yeah. So let's do this. The audio thing is kind of happening again. So let me like what we have so far should be fine. I'm going to call you through Discord instead of doing the video call, and we'll see if that fixes it. And if not, let's try Skype or something.
Okay, that works.
I don't know if that worked or not. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
It sounds a lot better right now. That's so weird. I don't know why that's happening. It's so weird. So if like you just talk for like a few seconds right now, like I'm sure it'll be fine.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's completely good right now.
I'm trying to the reason I keep looking at the side of my computer here. I want to go get headphones because I feel like that would help, but I only have.
Oh, maybe it's because of the like when I'm talking, or if you're getting some kind of reverb from the speakers and the microphone and everything. But that shouldn't impact you while you're speaking. It should only impact your ability to speak into the microphone while I'm speaking. But let's try that, I guess. I think if it's like this, actually, it's fine because I can still see you. So that should be fine. Let me. That's so weird. I don't know why this is happening. All right, so just talk for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah. But if you talk for a couple seconds, I think it's going to start wavering because of here. So it's like just start talking about something.
I'm talking about something. Is it starting to crackle now?
No, it is not. So, all right, we're still running. So we're fine. Let's just try again. So basically, one thing that I kind of wanted to compare was the rankings that I started doing yesterday with what you have, because mine is like almost entirely based off of the eye test, and I'm not some kind of stat denier. Like I think that the statistics can be helpful. It's just for League of Legends specifically. I think a lot of the stats that are out there that are like pushed by all of these leagues are kind of misleading, or at least often not given with like the correct amount of context. Because like we were talking about this before the video started or the recording started. I'm kind of more of a philosophy guy than a statistics guy. I have done both. I think I'm pretty good at both, but philosophically, like the way that we learn things and the way that we internalize that information is really important. And a lot of people in the world, not even just the League of Legends community, when you give them something to kind of latch onto and you tell them, look at this statistic helps you predict stuff, then it's complete cognitive dissonance, or not cognitive dissonance. They're never going to change their mind ever. They're going to be completely stagnated by that, and they will never change their mind. It becomes complete dogma, and then you should just never take it away, which is horrible, because then it makes it so difficult for the community to move forward. So the League of Legends community has been around for like 10 years. The amount of progress that we've made is laughable in terms of like understanding the game. It's actually like, it's horrifying. It's really, really bad. But right now, recently, like this guy LS, he's one of the LCK casters. You're probably familiar with him. He's been on like a crusade talking about like items and stuff like that. I've been doing that for 3 years. He's been doing it for a long time as well. I'm not trying to take any credit for it, but I think that's always been a way where you could kind of carve out an edge, and nobody's been doing it, and now they're talking about it, but they're talking about it the wrong way, so we're safe for now. But I feel like the window of opportunity is closing, so that's kind of scary. But talking about China again, I'm gonna move over your rankings real quick. So in my opinion, I had. Let me just put another column in here. I'm gonna break this out by league. Because you said that you were checking out the latest video that I put out on my rankings. I'm very high on China right now. I think that there's a lot to be excited about. A lot of their young teams are pretty good and talented, which is really good news for their league in general. And it was funny. Like I saw the ESPN rankings and I kind of freaked out because I just thought they were like the worst things. It was like the worst ranking that I've ever seen in my entire life. So my lowest team in China right now is DMO. DMO, you have third to last. So we're in a pretty similar spot. I'm just going to try to find some outliers. So Rogue Warriors is your lowest team. I have them pretty low as well. Billy Gaming is they're a little high. so we could talk about that. Vici Gaming, OMG, E-Star, and LNG. There's a huge clump of teams in my rankings that are mostly from China, and the reason that kind of happened is because I think the amount of like film and information we have on these teams might make me a little biased towards them, but I've seen a lot of these teams play really well and really bad, so maybe I'm just giving the good too much credit, or like giving them the benefit of the doubt too often. Yeah.
No, I'd agree with that. Just looking at it from a more really just from an entirely statistical driven basis. What I found is, so when I've looked at through the 2 weeks that we've seen of the summer split so far, looking at the rank percentage, sort of looking at my rankings on sort of the percentage basis versus the raw basis. When teams that are ranked within 10% of each other play, the team that's ranked higher has actually won less than 50% of the games. It's almost 50-50, I think, in the long run. That's where I expect it about to come out. But if you move up and you do only games where the difference in rank percentage is at least 10, the higher ranked team then wins 67% of the games. And if you move that up to 20%, then the higher ranked team wins almost 80% of the games. So I think what that says to me, and it sort of reinforces what I think what you said, and what I think, especially in the LPL and in the spring we saw, is you sort of have your elite teams, you have your bottom teams, and you have a lot of teams in that sort of 5 to 12 range that on any given night, one or the other could beat the other.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm pretty afraid of using goal differential as one of the main stats for that kind of modeling, because it's probably not a popular opinion in DraftKings right now, but I've been saying pretty often that I'm highly skeptical about the projection systems that are out there, because like we're not trying to figure out what an average score is going to look like for these teams. I think you said at one point, someone you would listen to said that they have win-based stats and loss-based stats. I think that is better than like what some of the projection sites do. Like I think Roto Grinders and Awesemo have kind of started figuring out that their projections have been pretty bad, because it's more about picking winners. My whole thing has been about picking winners the entire time that I've played DraftKings. It's much more beneficial on one-game slates because I'm better at identifying underdogs than the normal person looking at these matches. And I think that's probably been a big part of my struggle in the LPL and LCK, because I can identify which teams should be able to take games off of the better team, but doing that 2 times out of 3 games is just like so much less likely. These risks that I would take in like the best of ones in North America and in Europe just don't pay off the same way. The teams are getting closer to their projected scores more often than I think that they probably should, because like every night there is that one team that is like, oh, they got them right. It's like they projected them to be the highest scoring team on the slate. They were the highest scoring team on the slate within 5 to 10. My problem is that any one of the winning teams has that opportunity to be the highest scoring team on the slate. It mostly comes down to like, did that team have access to a game not played bonus? Did that team that they were playing against have like a play style that when they're losing, they're just going to continue to throw themselves at the winning team to try to make a comeback, or are they just going to lay down and die? So those are the kinds of things that are tough to predict from game to game, because so much of it comes down to team composition and the champions that they draft in the draft, because like that's just the way it is. So I wish that teams could pick their champions beforehand and let us know what their champions were going to be and then let us bet on it, but that's never going to happen. So we're kind of stuck. We're kind of stuck where we are right now. So if we look again at this, we're in the LPL. So DMO I have last. DMO, I think with their roster changes and everything, it's going to be pretty tough to see them taking a lot of games off of teams that are better than them. Rogue Warriors, I don't think that they're playing the right group of players right now. They have a jungler on their bench that is better than the jungler that they're playing, which is kind of insane. Billy Gaming, They have a jungler on their bench who is probably better than their jungler that's playing right now. So some of the stats that you have for gold differential might be a little off because it's not taking that roster change into consideration, since it's like a team level stat.
I guess the one thing I will add there to sort of just contextualize these is so in the spring. So I had a version of this metric that I used in the spring as well, before I had done sort of my back testing, and that was on a team by team basis. And then, but when, with all the roster changes in between spring and summer, I actually switched to I guess the main driver of this was actually E-Star, who, with sort of their entire roster swapping out, I was like, this, what I have from the spring is irrelevant. So this is actually
V5, yeah.
V5. I'm sorry, not V5. I guess E-Star had a couple, Cryan left, so they had, but V5 is the one I'm thinking of. And so this actually looks at the cumulative. It sort of treats the 5 starters from the last game as a team for the past, however, 15 games that I'm looking at or whatever, as opposed to looking at the team itself.
Yeah, that's smart.
So this would the reason so this would account for that roster change, but I think that where that also creates some just additional variance within the model is you don't have the same sample size. Maybe they've only played against weak competition, so you don't have proper context, things like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So then just moving on, Vici Gaming. Vici Gaming is pretty low in your model, pretty low in my rankings. Vici Gaming, a lot of players have a lot of respect for the players on Vici Gaming and the coach. Obviously, Koma is one of the best coaches of all time, but they have some roster issues right now that I didn't anticipate at all. So now they're looking to bring in a young Korean mid laner to replace Forge. That guy Zika, he got his first start of the season in like game 2 the other day. That does show upside, and it is nice that they're actually trying to make a change. But my position on substitutes has kind of been it's a bad thing for the team during the split. Maybe it's good long term, but if you're trying to keep your team consistent and engaged and motivated, I would hate having a substitute personally. That would just drive me insane, knowing that I can get taken out at any second. I would not deal well with that.
Vici's one that I think they probably, if I went back further, have been the most. They probably ping pong the most in these rankings over. I think it was around week 6 of LPL Spring when I first started looking at these. And by the end of the spring splits, or right before when they were making the push for the playoffs, I think they went out their last 3 series or something and came up short. But they were really high, maybe right behind the top tier teams of like FPX and JDG and TES in that sort of second tier. And I think my worst slates in the summer were the first couple of games that DMO played, as we discussed earlier, and then Vici were still sort of up there, and then have sort of fallen off. But I think to your point, they at least by these numbers certainly have the potential to get back up there, even though they're low now. Yeah,
like if this was a best of 1 league, I think Vici would be kind of interesting when they're playing against these better teams, because like maybe they're able to kind of game plan a little bit better around a specific scenario and get like one really good pick ban set put together and then take it to one of the bigger teams. But in a best of 3, it reduces the variance so much. Like there are so many more opportunities for them to make really big mistakes and just not be as good as the other team. Because talent wins out.
Do you think Leon's a better choice at jungler for them?
I didn't like Aix or Chieftain very much last split, but I don't like Leon that much either. I think that it was interesting that Invictus Gaming had him as their jungler, because his playstyle doesn't really make sense with the Shy and Rookie. So basically, those are 2 very like, look at me, I'm a great player kind of players. And you would need like it would be like in the NFL if you had a running back that wants a million touches a game, and you have a wide receiver that wants a million touches a game, and you need Ben Roethlisberger to make Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell happy, or you're going to have a gigantic problem. I think with Leon, it was always just a gigantic problem because he ended up being like a quarterback that wanted the ball himself. So it's like it was just out of control. So you have him playing champions like Kiana where he's farming a decent amount in the early game. That's where all the big volatility is happening in a lot of these games, because if you have a bad jungle matchup as Kiana and you get caught out in the jungle, you can't contest a Rift Scuttle, you can't show up to the first gank of the game, one of your lanes is going to fall pretty far behind, and you need both of your solo lanes to do well if you're Invictus Gaming, because their bot lane has been a big question mark for ever since they got rid of Jackie Love, or since Jackie Love left. So yeah, that Leon, maybe he has some upside. I think he is a relatively young player. Maybe Koma can help him, but his champion pool is kind of an issue right now. This is probably one of the worst metas for him. He was perfect in the meta that was going on in the off season, because during some of these like Kespa Cup tournaments and like weird tournaments that happen in China and Korea, he was playing all the champions that you needed to play. But now he just doesn't play the champions at the same level. Yeah.
Well, I had one question for you actually, because and this is something I've thought about sort of going through these, and you know, sort of the transition from spring to summer. From a DFS perspective, how much do you think the meta sort of impacts sort of who the best player may be at a given time? You know, when I'm always looking for, you know, in other sports, sort of when information goes stale. You know, I think in every sport, right, you have players improve, players decline, and you're going to try to want to make sure you sort of hit a sweet spot where you're not taking information that's no longer relevant. In League, you have this additional element where the game itself is changing. Not only are the players evolving, and so I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
I think that a very like a good self-aware model or self-conscious model would look at itself pretty critically every patch, because there aren't wide sweeping changes every patch, but if you're not taking a look at it every single patch, then you might miss something. And the 10.6 going from 10.6 to 10.7, we saw a gigantic shift in what was important for teams, which changed which players had the most influence on games, which changed the teams that could like really be the best teams. Because increasing your win percentage by a lot is going to increase all your DraftKings stats, increase your goal differential, increase your kills, and increase everything like that. So I was on the 10.7 change instantly, and in those first couple of slates, it didn't bear itself out because these teams weren't necessarily playing all of the junglers that you needed to. But by the time we got to the playoffs in Korea and China, everyone started to realize what I felt like I had realized probably a couple weeks earlier. And the professional team started really focusing on Kindred, Graves, Nidalee, Galio, and very like mid jungle centric team compositions, fighting around dragons, doing all these other kinds of things that were taking place in the previous meta, but now with different champions. And that really does explain the rise of JDG. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're having a big regression hit right now, is that the meta is kind of moving away from them. The one thing that I'd be careful with about the patch and the meta and these kinds of things is that professional teams are not, and I honestly mean this, some people aren't going to like that I'm going to say this, professional teams are not good on an organizational level. They don't have processes in place that make them meta resilient, patch resistant. They just don't have those things in place. They're just not the infrastructure needed, and with like critical thinkers and stuff in place. You see a lot of the teams that do have this are successful long term. The other ones are good on a patch or two, and then they fall to the wayside. So a team like G2, a team like Cloud9, a team like T1, they are better than almost every other team in their league at those kinds of things, or they have an extreme amount of talent. So T1 is meta resilient, patch resilient, has one of the best players in the world, can adapt very well because they have one of the best players in the world. And mid lane is often the crux of your team. It's like in soccer, how the spine of your defense has to be very strong, or the spine of your team has to be very strong so that you can attack and defend well. So in League of Legends, Faker is basically that spine of your team, where he can control the mid lane and you can play off of him. A team like G2 is just extremely talented compared to everybody else in Europe. So I'm not convinced that they're great at anticipating patches or anticipating meta shifts. And
Cloud9 probably falls in that category too.
Yeah, Cloud9 is definitely more talented, and I think Cloud9 might be their better playstyle is being aggressive. So if they can continuously find different game plans that allow them to be aggressive in the early and mid game, then they can continue to be early and mid game teams. But once we get it'll be interesting for everybody in the DFS community to see it for the first time. But as we get closer to Worlds, I anticipate more changes to be made to the game that are going to make the teams want to play for less variance, play a more Korean style, and focus around team fighting with their AD carries. So AD carries will become more important. Junglers will probably be tankier going forward, less volatility in the early game, and just like an easier game script to follow, because they do like giving they like spoon feeding their audiences when it comes to Worlds and stuff like that.
Sure.
It's just easier to follow. So the last thing before we get back into the rankings is, what do you think about the phrase meta? Like, from a not even necessarily in League of Legends, but like, what does the phrase meta mean to you?
Meta to me means, I guess you're say. It's definitely one of those words, right, that you use a lot, and but is very tough to pinpoint. So I would say it is the it's sort of maybe like the cloud. It's sort of the overarching context of the micro game, or if that is.
So I think
clear.
So I think by like I'm not sure I understand completely, but so if you're saying that it's kind of like the cloud, so it's like the amorphous object that like all the micro decisions stem from. So it's like this larger body that dictates all the other kinds of decisions that you can make.
Yeah. I guess what.
Here, so let me give you the problem with meta in League of Legends, and then if it changes what you think about it, then you can change your answer. So in my opinion, the meta, the search for the meta or trying to discover the meta is the search for figuring out the best way to play the game. The best strategy for a game is often considered like the meta strategy. So if you're talking about meta in like poker, it's like, well, you want aces. Aces, it's the best starting hand. It allows your decision making to be a lot easier because like if you're playing it just statistically driven, you know that you're going to win more hands and you're going to lose when you have pocket aces. In League of Legends, the meta, the quote-unquote meta that everyone talks about is based off of popularity. So it's complete garbage and it's worthless. The professional teams operate based off of this meta. That it's like, okay, I know that the other team thinks that these champions are good. I'm going to base my team compositions off of what is popular around the world. So when you go down that rabbit hole, you're giving too much credit, in my opinion, to all these organizations who I don't think are actually good at determining what the strongest possible team composition is, the best champions, the best items on any patch. And I think that there's going to be a team eventually that figures out the best way to determine what the meta is and anticipate meta shifts and champion shifts is going to be studying the game system more closely, because everyone forgets this is a video game, hard-coded. Every item that you buy has statistics. When you buy an item, you're not buying some kind of cool thing like, look at me, I'm going to kill you with this cool-looking sword. You're buying a pile of stats that changes how good your champion is. That's all that's happening in the game. And then every time that you like attack somebody, it's a math equation. It's very simple. And there's a lot that like player input is obviously very important, because there are certain things that the statistics aren't going to glean, like the way that you can actually end up playing with it practically. Like in theory it might sound nice, but then you try doing it in the game and it's too difficult. So there is that give and take, but that's where I would start. I feel like the professional scene right now is dictated by popularity when they really need to be more game system focused. Like it would be like changing like in baseball, you change the stitching on a baseball or the weight of a baseball, and it increases or decreases the amount of home runs that are hit, right?
Yeah.
That is a patch change. That's a patch change.
The similar analogy, I think I heard someone else make early on when I was trying to get up to speed is like, what if the NBA decided that a dunk was suddenly worth 2.1 points, and like all of a sudden Dwight Howard, like you just want to feed the post much more because you're getting an extra 20 points a game out of that. So I just a couple of thoughts there. I think that's very enlightening for me. I think just as a way to frame all of this. I think I was trying to zoom too far, but I was trying to get too meta about meta. I was thinking about like metaphysics as I was trying to give like my cloud definition. So I think sort of going back to sort of in the sports or game theory context, my personal definition would be the sort of the first one you described, right? The win strategy, sort of what is this game about? What are our goals in this game?
Yeah.
What is the best means for achieving those goals in this game? I think sort of maybe just to rephrase what you said, or just put what you said in different words, is right that right now there's this assumption that the pro teams are the smartest, right? That what they're doing is, which then becomes popular, is the right way to do it, and sort of it's sort of top down as opposed to bottom up. Exactly. Looking at like, okay, what are the stats this patch? Who builds the best with that? Who has the best synergy with those types of things? And sort of on the last point, something that I've been thinking about a little bit on my own, and I think really came to light as I was sort of really doing a deep dive on these statistics and building out my model for the summer split, is in sort of live sports, we've developed these statistics that are the basis of the DFS game, but it's sort of like we started playing this game and then we tried to figure out sort of what statistics are most relevant. Yeah. And there's this human element and it's human beings out in the world. Which is what I'm trying to say is that I think particularly from a DFS perspective, because it's a video game, because those numbers are hard coded, I think you see a much more direct correlation between things that are happening in the game and the numbers that are spit out that we're looking at to try to figure out sort of points and things. Not that it's easy to predict, certainly not. Not that it's even more predictive, because you still have all the wins, losses, all these different things, different changes, different misclicks. Like it's something as simple as that. But I think that it's easier to sort of identify, like, this is what I'm looking at, and having that sort of direct causation when you're dealing with a computer game as opposed to a live game.
Yeah, I think so. What you just said kind of made me also think, like, in sports, like in traditional sports, the NFL has been, or let's just do basketball. Basketball was around for what, close to 100 years. And then a bunch of nerds started saying, "Oh, well, like we have a 3-point line now. Maybe take some more 3-point shots. Like mathematically, I mean, it's pretty obvious that as long as you're hitting this amount of 3-pointers, you're going to score more points. Scoring points is pretty good. You'll win more games." And then everybody was like, "No, that's really stupid. You take your numbers and you go home because you're a loser and you've never touched a basketball in your life." But then they're like, "Oh, wait a second. It turns out they were right. Well, that sucks. Now we have to give them credit." I think in traditional sports, people were so infatuated with the idea of like the human, like overcoming the other human, and just didn't want the statistics to be relevant. I feel like in video games, it's kind of the opposite. I think we have all of these numbers that are in front of us and jammed into our face, and it's like, oh, well, I know that this item costs this much gold and has like this kind of impact on my champion. So as long as I look at all the numbers, that's all I need to look at, and then the human element is kind of actually forgotten. So that's why it's funny in League of Legends, they wanted to copy the traditional sports scene so bad that they started looking for statistics, but they didn't realize that the reason the professional sports had statistics is because the numbers don't really matter that much in the game itself. It's like the numbers are a result of the play. In League of Legends, the play is a result of the numbers. So you're trying to get numbers to explain numbers that like are impacted by players. It's just so funny. So so I think that's kind of why.
It's like one of those things where like you go to a like Google Translate, right, and you type a word into English and it spits something out in Spanish, and then you take the Spanish and you put it back into the Spanish translator, and something different comes out in English. Like that's sort of the same thing, right? You take numbers, put them in, something comes out, go back.
Yeah. So I have never thought about it like that before, because I've always been very skeptical about the statistics like that they're trying to push in our face, like the traditional sports statistics from the LCS, because I just thought they were garbage and like didn't actually tell us anything. It's like the opposite fight. Like, I'm the kind of guy that I want more stats in traditional sports. I want stats to stay the hell away from League of Legends because it's ruining them, because they don't use any of the right statistics. So I guess it's just because we haven't found the right statistics. So we've been talking for 45 minutes already. Let's get back to this ranking system. Finish the ranks, and then we can kind of figure out where we go from here. because this has been pretty good. I think we've said some informative stuff. So let's take a look at the top down now. So in my rankings right now, I think that Top Esports and FPX are the two best teams in China. Based off of the longer term data, like the goal differential data that's longer term, I think that makes sense for Top Esports and for JDG and for FPX to be up that high, right? JDG, I've predicted, if anybody who's watched like the DFS Bachelor videos that I do on Kyle's channel, where I say like, I hate JDG, I hope the JDG bandwagon crashes, regression is coming, screw JDG. I feel like I've been kind of right, but I think it's getting overblown now. Like, I didn't want to cause anybody harm. It's just like they were due for regression because they were so great on the last patch. So I think that we will probably see JDG kind of level off around the 3rd or 4th space in China, or place in China. For Top Esports and FPX, I think that they just have, they're more meta resilient. So Top Esports has been very good. They did benefit a little bit from the last patch, but it's because their preferred playstyle their preferred playstyle was good against the meta. So Graves, Nidalee, Kindred, all very good champions. They play a ton of Lee Sin because Karsa's really good at Lee Sin, and they were just like, screw it, we'll just go for it and try to turn it into a coin flip, and they were good at coin flipping. They had very talented players. You can't really take it away from them. They just did a really good job at the Mid-Season Cup and so far in this split. FPX, they've lost a few matches to some really bad teams, or just, yeah, really bad teams. But the numbers aren't going to start crucifying them until they get like another couple losses under their belt, right? So they've built up such a large gold lead over time that they're probably safe where they are. V5, this is probably where your new adjustment in rankings comes in, right? Because like now you're looking at the 5 players individually. So are some of those stats from the LDL?
Yes, they are. So yeah, I think. I guess just quickly on JDG, I think that your what you've seen with your eyes and what you just described sort of lines up with what's happened in these numbers. I think FPX was the #1 team in my numbers up until about week 6, or maybe even early in week 7 of the spring split. And really, once Zoom came back and they went, JDG went on that undefeated streak to finish the season.
Yeah.
They just skyrocketed, and by the time that the finals came around, they were really in a tier by themselves in these rankings.
Yeah.
And then just obviously come back down to earth through the Mid-Season Cup and into these into the early games here in the summer. With E-Star or V5 rather, yes. So for I think that what do I have here in the sample? I think this is basically running off of 15 to 20 games worth of data. And so for PP God and Sam D, this is probably like 75%. The first few games here in the LPL, which have been against average-ish competition. I think if I recall right.
Yeah.
And the remainder from the LDL playoffs.
Yeah. So, it's funny. V5, I didn't anticipate them making, as many changes as they did during the offseason. And their early season schedule has been kind of weak. So they have played a lot of lower-tier teams, and the best teams that they've played are mid-tier teams. So I'm still pretty skeptical about their long-term success. But it's a lot of fun. Saying Sam D and PP God on Esports Center, so I'm not complaining. Then we get to LGD, World Elite, E-Star, RNG, Invictus Gaming, and Sunning, and as well as EDG. So I think right now, if I had to kind of do my expectations for where the numbers are going to go from here, I think that EDG is underrated. So I think V5 is overrated. I think LGD, Team World Elite, RNG, Invictus Gaming, and EDG, I really do think that's a clump right now, where these teams are going to have to distinguish themselves over multiple patches, figure out the different metas, anticipate what the other team is going to do in drafts. There are a lot of different factors that are going to separate these teams moving forward. V5 can get into that tier where they are competitive with these teams, but we haven't seen it yet. and it's going to be hard to trust the goal differential because they've been winning. So when you earlier when you said like JDG skyrocketed, it's pretty easy to have good goal differential when you go on like a 21 out of 22 game win streak or something like that. So that's always why I get a little afraid with goal differential and stuff like that. What I would say is I think that what you've created is perfect for like a dominator ranking. So it's like if we use this to explain Gen G, then it could be like, okay, going into a match, Gen G last split, not this split, going into a match, I expect them to go 2-0 because they are a dominant team. They create that early goal lead. They have a huge goal differential over most teams. The only time that you can't really trust it is when they're against a team in their own tier. So like if you told me, like that other sheet that you have, the 10 point, 20 point, 30 point, like that plus a dominator rating, like you'd be able to give out that like that kind of information. This team is very dominant as long as they're playing teams in different tiers and stuff like that, because I think that will kind of show itself in team play style. So Invictus Gaming, I expect Invictus Gaming to not have a high dominator rating because they can lose against anybody because they play this high volatility style of game. Top Esports, FPX, JDG, a little bit less volatile than Invictus Gaming. I would expect their goal differential to be more consistent throughout their matches and dropping less games in general to shitty teams. So
and you can see that right there with IG. You know, 2-3 weeks ago they were second to last, and then now they're back up in the middle of the pack.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It was to show they have 3-4. And I guess just to add in, this is right now. When I look back at this, I found that like a 4-ish week sample was when things started to really be more meaningful. And so right now we're starting to get there in the LPL, but the other leagues still have a little bit of ways to go. So I think part of that is why there's so much volatility at this point. But I think to your point, that play style plays into that. They have 3 games in a row or 3 series in a row where things don't break and they plummet. But that might not. It's a product of their play style versus their skill level.
Yeah. So before we get out of here, let's do a combined ranking. So we'll do. We'll call it the PBVE ranking.
That works.
So I'm gonna put down where I have the teams based off of my list, and then I want you to make me change it based off of what you're seeing, so it's more of a blend instead of just like regurgitating what I have. So in the world class tier, which that's what I used in my last ranking system, I have Top Esports and FPX. I think that it is actually kind of meaningful to have a separation between them and JDG at this point, because I was I was hopeful that the patch was going to kill JDG, and it's kind of been working, but I don't want them to stay dead, right? So I'm kind of hopeful that this is just a blip on the radar and they'll be able to kind of regain their form. But I think until we see that, and until we're sure of that, we kind of need to step them down a little bit. So in the next tier of teams, I would have JDG. RNG, I don't think deserves to be separated from the pack yet. So I'm going to put them in average. So right now we have world-class Top Esports and FPX, above average JDG, which is giving them a lot of credit for their past success. Then in the clump that we were talking about, I have Invictus Gaming, LGD, World Elite, Sunning, EDG, and that's that. Then we have the Big Dick bot lane. They're on their own tier. You can't have anybody else in the Big Dick bot lane tier because, people get jealous.
I'm sorry, which team was that?
V5. Sam D and the PP God.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. Imagine making a name for a game. You choose PP God, then you become a professional, and no one makes you change it. That's amazing. Oh, it's just incredible.
A lot of my friends, don't know anything about League, but the one thing that they've enjoyed the most is I've sort of done my, gotten obsessed with it over the past 3 months, is when I share with them like the funny user handles. Yeah. So Peanut was sort of the most elite through the spring split, but when you go from Peanut to PP God, it's just it's no content.
It's not even close. It's not even close.
Although Peanut in the in like the playoff photo where he was actually holding a peanut in the team photo.
That's quite good.
That was just, I love that.
Yeah. A lot of the posters that they put out are pretty good too. Like I know Mr. Malmander is like obsessed with that, and I think last night they posted one of Peanut holding a peanut or something. Like it was a Lee Sin fist with a peanut. It was pretty cool. Actually, I don't. That might have been Invictus Gaming's poster saying like we're gonna manhandle you like a peanut. Either way, very good. OMG, VG, BLG, Rogue Warriors, DMO, and that should be at 1, 2, 3. I have 16 teams. I'm missing somebody. DMO.
LNG? You
said...
Or Vici? Did we have Vici?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to check it is with your list. So, top esports. I'm guessing you don't have any problem with them being world-class?
No. I mean, hard to find, any argument with that.
Yeah. FPX?
No, but FPX has been my favorite team. Doinby is I think my favorite player at this point. So
is it the dancing? You like watching him dance? Is that it?
I like watching him dance. And when the second or third week when I was watching was they were doing a post game interview with him, and his quote was, "I want to thank my teammates for playing so horribly so that I could look so good." Nice. I was like, this guy's like
he
amazing.
Gets it. He gets it. I think I'm missing RNG because I wanted to drop them down a little bit.
Right.
Okay, so JDG right now I have a separation between between JDG and Top Esports and FPX. I think your rankings would probably say let's give them a little more credit and keep them world class, right?
I would I think that I think what I would say would just sort of be to tweak that. And actually, I think if we're just going based on the numbers, I think it would be Top Esports in a class by themselves almost. Like sort of maybe like the reigning champ or like their the what everybody else is chasing.
Yeah.
And then might have FPX and JDG in a tier below that.
Okay.
I guess my question, I really like FPX. I was rooting for them to win in the spring. What do you think happened to them down the stretch? Where they were from sort of when the LPL came back from coronavirus up until sort of the last couple weeks of the regular season, it felt like they were just sort of destroying everybody, and then sort of maybe took a step back a little bit in the playoffs. Or do you think that was just facing better teams?
I think that it was just facing better teams. I think FPX's playstyle is less. It's more cerebral in general. So if you have a mid laner who one of his best champions is like Ryze or something like that, that means that there's something about their playstyle that they're attracted to playing split pushing champions, like creating pressure on different parts of the map and trying to like outthink the opponent. So another player who kind of fits this mold, not as good as Doinby, but like Jizuki from Evil Geniuses, he plays a lot of champions. Like he played Echo where he was a split pusher. He plays Ryze. He plays LeBlanc. He's doing things that are not like traditional front to back team fighting. It's more like guerrilla warfare, I guess. But it's not necessarily like attacking. It's like creating a threat that they have to deal with and then trying to exploit that. So I think that's really the difference. Another team that's similar to that is Origin from Europe. So when they go up against a big bloody team like G2 or Fnatic, sometimes they have some issues. Okay, so we have those teams. And then what about the next tier? So you had V5 up there. Right now I have RNG, IG, LGD, World Elite, Sunning, and EDG all as one tier. You probably have some... There's probably some separation there based off of your rankings.
Yeah. I would say so coming in, I think for the reasons we talked about, I sort of took, particularly where teams were being driven by out-of-league data, took that with a big grain of salt. And so V5 has been, high, as you can see here, is actually, despite winning, come down in my rankings a little bit due to the fact that, half their team is playing at a higher level of competition. But I expected them to fall off similar to the way that DMO did, who were, basically had a similar setup from a data perspective. And they've held. And I think Sam D and PP God in particular looked great in their first few games. So we'll see what they do when they face higher level of competition. And I think what this would say is that, what they've dropped over the last 10, 12 games from the 50 to the 30, which says that even though they're winning, they're not winning by as much as you would expect an average team to. You would actually expect an average team to be beating these lower level teams by a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But I think that may suggest that they're probably I would put them more in that I'm probably a little lower on EDG. Just because they feel very just blah to me. The teams that are above them, they all have at least one or two guys where the name jumps out at me. And to me, it's just they're a great player. Even on WE, guys like Bishang and Jumang, I think are really good.
Yeah.
Not EDG. I think they're sort of solid, to me seem like they're solid across the board, but don't really have a player to sort of just sort of take over a game.
Yeah.
Or anybody can take over a game, but they can just to sort of consistently do that. I don't know enough about sort of the team or the game to know if they have this sort of team composition and sort of synergies there to overcome that, where it's sort of a like the Bucks, or maybe not the Bucks with Giannis now, but sort of one of those NBA teams where it's like the old Pistons teams where they don't have a superstar, but they're so good some of the parts type of thing.
Yeah.
But so I would put sort of V5 in sort of in that EDG, VG, maybe E-Star sort of class, and then have LGD, WE, Invictus, and maybe Suning in a sort of tier above that.
Okay, and then so then where would RNG be, above or below that?
I would put RNG is. They were a team that at the end of spring I thought was very good and were in that sort of third tier in these rankings, and then they've just sort of fallen off the board. And so I think I don't know if bias is the right word against them, but I'm very cautious about them, probably because they've burned me in DFS a lot.
Sure.
I've had a lot of slates where I've had a lot of RNG, and it's cost me. And then sort of the opposite happened the other night. I did all right on the slate they played, but I had who did they play the other night? E-Star? Did they play?
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, whoever they played, I had the other team winning, even though RNG was like a 60% favorite by Vegas. So I might put them with V5 in sort of like a wait and see, even though we know a lot more about the players.
Yeah. So okay, so that's interesting. I think that's I'll give my last thoughts, and then I think that's probably a good spot to stop. I think that it's very interesting. So you talked about EDG and RNG specifically. RNG in the ESPN rankings is the number 7 team they were the number 4 team in the world in the ESPN rankings. So basically what I think is happening is people who have been watching League of Legends for a long time, they have a lot of narratives that they like about RNG. Like Uzi was like the most popular player in the world at one point. Betty's coming in to replace him. Xiao Hu was an up-and-coming player. He was 17 in like his first world championship and was considered one of the top 10 players in the world, but he never really materialized into that great transcendent player. I think that the narrative is kind of writing the rankings for these writers. I have RNG pretty high up there just because I was trying to take their rankings into consideration and blending it in with my own. I think that RNG is a very good team. I think that they do pass the eye test. The second team that you were talking about was EDG. EDG, it's funny. I thought that the public was high on EDG because in the traditional League community they are. Like, people love Scout, Mako, and Hope. They feel like those 3 players are great players in China. They were very good at different points. Their coach, I think, was their jungler, so Clearlove was their jungler back in the day. They were a very, very, very good team. They had a very young core. They were expected to be one of the best teams in China for a long time. They've kind of taken a step backwards, but they do have that core of players that are very good. So it's going to come down to, like, can they figure out top lane? Can they figure out jungle and help the rest of their team? So if we move into a meta that the jungle is less important, I could see EDG kind of taking that next step. So I think from an eye test, I think EDG is better than what their DraftKings performances have shown. Same thing with RNG. Their DraftKings performances haven't lived up to how good they are at the game itself. So now it kind of seems like we're getting to a type of play style that we're kind of more attracted to for DraftKings, which is kind of what I expected, but it's becoming more clear. Like the DFS perspective on teams that influences ownership is probably much more interested in a type of play style than a chance of winning the game.
Yeah, I think to maybe just put a bow on that, the thing that when I sort of got to the end of the road, and as I was going through all this in the spring, from a player by player perspective, is my numbers hate the shot, which just doesn't make sense. Like my numbers say he's one of the worst top laners, which is driven by the fact that he's not very high scoring from a DFS perspective. Yeah. I think when IG wins, it's usually the ADC that pops off. And when they lose, nobody scores well in losses. So I think he averages 30 or 29 DraftKings points in the sample I have in my model here, which is below average for a top laner. But, isn't indicative of sort of how much he's helping the team win on any given night.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun. That was a pretty fast hour. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So thanks for stopping by. I think this was pretty great. I think we should check in every once in a while, see how your model is doing. Maybe do some other kind of content. So everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you found that as enjoyable as I did. I'll see you later.
Yeah, man.